The words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable to you, O Lord, our rock and our redeemer. Amen. A week ago, last Friday, we had a fantastic night in our house. Well, it wasn't actually in our house, but in our household. We invited my parents and Stacy's parents out. They're all retiring except for my mom, and we took them out to the theater, to a show, had dinner beforehand. It was just a fantastically delightful night of fellowship and catching up and just family sort of stuff, and the show was fantastic. It was just a great night. We got in our warm car. We didn't have a warm house prior to that earlier in the week, but we got in our warm car. Everything was climate controlled. We came home to a warm house and warm beds. We ate well. It was just one of those great, great nights. Right? A couple days before that, I found myself in this space as we grieved the loss of one of our faithful people here at House of Prayer. There was weeping. There was heartbreak, sadness. And then after that was over, I went up to my home congregation in Indiana County, which, as many of you know, burned the day before that. Someone set fire to the church and burned it down. And there I led a vigil with my home congregation people, the people that raised me, the people that wish they probably never would have taught Sunday school because of terrible Michael Sauerwein in their Sunday school class. And we, again, remembered the stories of our church, and we grieved, and we cried, and we hurt, and we wondered, and we were angry, and we wanted to hold somebody accountable to that thing, for doing that thing. And so both of these events happened within 2 days of one another, and Jesus has a pretty strong declaration in this gospel about which one is the blessed one, the good one, the sacred one, the better one. Which one is it? Don't be bashful. It's the second one, right? The one where there was heartbreak and loss and grief and sadness and anger and those sort of things. For some reason, Jesus teaches his people that that's where the blessing is. And conversely, the woes, the heartbreak, the where you don't want to be, is the place where people are rich, where people are full, juxtaposed with hungry, where people are laughing. That's the place you don't want to be. So this style of teaching is ancient. In the book of Deuteronomy, the prophets well before Jesus spoke like this. They gave out the way in which God's people were to live, and there were the blessings, the way in which you were supposed to live, and then the woes, the other side, the way in which things weren't supposed to be, the way that wasn't perfectly in line with God's kingdom. And so Jesus is grabbing onto this ancient teaching pattern, this ancient way of introducing God's kingdom. But this is different. I mean, I don't know about the world you live in, but the world that I live in, it is much better to be full of good food, to have lots of great things to drink, the richest coffees. I mean, I like good coffee. I go to the little roastery in New Brighton. I bring back the good coffee there. I grind it in the morning. I get the temperature just right. I'm such a dork about that stuff. It feels like that's the right way to live, to make more money, to work good jobs. Isn't this your experience in the world? Why does Jesus say that that is not the way of God's kingdom? Why does Jesus suggest that the way that you can find yourself closer to God is actually in a place of despair and sadness and poverty? So he goes on a little farther there. We don't want to answer that one right away. He starts talking about how you care for those who have abused you, taken advantage of you, hurt you and your family. He uses the word enemy. Last Wednesday night, I knew an enemy. I didn't know them, but I knew of someone who had burned my home church. And as I crested the last hill looking at my home church there in the valley, I didn't really experience this prior, but I had anger in me. I saw holes in my home congregation's church roof, and I was angry that someone had done this to them. And then as I saw the people I loved and grew up with there that night, I became more angry. I wanted the police to find the person who did this and throw the book at them, right? To hold them extremely accountable, to throw them in jail forever. That'd be fine with me. But yet Jesus, in his teaching here, says that we should love that person. And not like in a let's do justice or vengeance or eye for an eye back to them. Love your enemy and do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who abuse you. Would this be like inviting that person who burnt my home church into church on Sunday morning, standing next to them and putting Jesus' body and blood in their hands and blessing them? That's a hard one for me. Jesus' teaching is not the way of the world. The way of the world does not teach us to love our enemies, to pray for those who abuse us. Our gut reaction and then the cultural fed encouragement is one of retaliation. When someone does something to you, you have to stand up for yourself to show them you are the better person, that you're just as strong, that you won't be backed down, right? Isn't this the language we put in people's minds? Especially for boys. You can't be one of the wimpy boys out there. You have to stand up for yourself. I remember a number of years ago, we were having this conversation among some high school people here, and I was told effusively by one of the high school boys that if someone punched them, they would absolutely punch them back because they had to show how strong they were. And I cited this text, and I said that Jesus asks us for another way. And he said, but that way is wimpy, and will get you beat up again. And I said, you're right with the second point. You may get beat up again, but it is anything but wimpy. Why does Jesus teach like this? Why does he tell us that the place of heartbreak is where God is? Why does he tell us that we need to pray for our enemies, forgive them, move on, encourage them, bless them? Not because it's wimpy, like that high school young person said. It's actually anything but wimpy. To do these things are acts of defiance against the culture that tells us that this isn't the way of the world. To stand there when someone punches you in the face, as Jesus says just in a moment later, and turn the other cheek isn't an act of wimpiness. It's an act of defiance. It's a non-violent act of defiance. Jesus will not allow himself to just simply take a beating, but he will show that he is the better person, not by fighting back, but by showing the sort of person, the sort of strength and courage that is in him to not fight back. It's much more courageous to not fight than to fight. And Jesus demonstrates this all through the Gospels and lives it out on the cross as they crucify him. It's not just cheap talk here in the 6th chapter of Luke. So again, why is Jesus saying all this? Why does he point to this new way of doing things? And why is it so opposite of the world around him? Because this all points back to what God is like. God is not like us. While we might want to retaliate, God refuses to. Our God is a God of gentleness and love and compassion, which is amazing because when we confess our brokenness, as we did this morning, we can expect a God that isn't like, well, you better go say 10 things in which you're wrong, and you don't need to do anything to make yourself right with God. God just loves you back. Now, I imagine that this sort of talk infuriates some people. Like to suggest that we ought to be completely peaceful people, that we ought not to fight back. It might make some of us mad. It makes me mad in some moments. But I encourage you to it anyway. Sometimes the things Jesus teaches us are not easy. They're not things that come naturally to us. Because again, God's kingdom is not our kingdom. God is not like us. If you want to see what God is like, look at Jesus. And look at these words that are not like the world we live in. Amen.